The vast majority of women who start counting macros end up getting their numbers calculated by somebody that doesn't understand the female body and just wants them to lose fat fast for a transformation photo. Or worse, they use an online calculator that calculates calories and macros based off outdated assumptions. This is problematic because it can lead to hormonal issues, plateaus, and inability to lose fat even at low calorie intakes. And unfortunately, I've seen these scenarios cascade from frustration to guilt and self-criticism. If you watched my video about how to calculate macros for fat loss, this video will teach you some of the important things to consider as a woman when you're calculating your fat loss macros. When it comes to calculating macros for women, I think it's very important to point out the role that carbohydrates and calories play in female sex hormone regulation. The next two things I say might sound sciencey, but bear with me. I'll make it simple. A 2003 study showed that just 5 days of calorie restriction in women who were doing a substantial amount of exercise saw decreases in some important sex hormones as a result. In particular, a decrease in luteinizing hormone pulsality, which surges to produce normal ovulation and stimulates estrogen production in healthy women. The study also discussed how the female brain needs 80 grams of glucose available per day, and the experiment showed that luteinizing hormone pulsality was disrupted at carbohydrate availabilities less than 90 to 130 grams per day. With this in mind, we can see how the female body is less likely to respond favorably in the long run to fasting, very low carb diets, and extreme calorie restrictions. This means that when calculating macros and putting together a nutrition program for women, it's important to be very careful not to overly restrict calories or carbohydrates. Otherwise, you might feel like crap, put yourself at a higher risk of fractures, experience irregular menstrual cycles, and paradoxically, even see plateaus in fat loss with too much calorie restriction. In my experience, a 20% calorie deficit tends to be safe for women over the course of a 12-week period and will provide a healthy rate of fat loss. The study I referenced earlier makes me think that we will see the negative effects of calorie restriction when we dip below the 30% deficit mark. So when calculating calories for fat loss for women, a 20% deficit is a good target. But if you already have a lot of fat to lose, you can get away with up to a 30% deficit. The problem with eating close to that 30% deficit is that calculating balanced macros becomes difficult, and it's more likely you will be hungry or low energy. You can download the macro calculation worksheet in the description below to learn a little bit about how to appropriately calculate your calorie needs, or just watch our calculating macros for fat loss video. If you've already watched that video and downloaded that worksheet, you'll realize that macros will become difficult to balance with extreme calorie restriction, and it will become difficult to eat that way in a real-world situation. Let's walk through an example. If you weigh 150 pounds and calculated your total calorie needs to be 1,800 calories, and you aim for a 30% calorie deficit, that means you only get to eat 1,260 calories. If you go with our fat loss protein target of 1 gram per pound of body weight, and you weigh 150 pounds, you are eating 150 grams of protein, which is 600 calories from protein, which means you just have 660 calories left for fat and carbs. As I mentioned earlier, glucose availability to your brain can affect sex hormones, and the minimum glucose you would want available for your brain is 80 grams. Because the average female's muscles use 25 grams of carbs per day at rest, and the average female eats about 15 grams of fiber, which is carbs that aren't available to your brain, this would suggest that 120 grams of carbs would barely satisfy your minimum carb needs on a rest day. 120 grams of carbs is 480 calories, which means we would only have 180 calories left over for fats, which is 20 grams of fat. For reference, 1 tablespoon of olive oil has 13 grams of fat. That's over half your fat total. Take fish oil, say goodbye to almost a quarter of that daily fat. 20 grams is an insanely low fat intake and would be very difficult to achieve without a lot of protein supplementation because meat contains fat, and it would leave no margin for eating at restaurants, which are likely cooking with over 20 grams of fat per meal. Calculating macros for women is a more delicate situation, even though they're more resilient to stress than men. So when you're calculating macros for yourself or for female clients, please take into consideration your calorie needs, your minimum carb needs, and what your macro targets would look like in a real-world situation. At Beyond Macros, these are all important considerations we make that are commonly overlooked. It's no wonder that this yo-yo dieting is so common, and that's why we always try to help our clients find the sustainable path. To get your fat loss macros calculated with a guide for what to do next and a meal planning template with coaching notes, check out our Fat Loss Macros and Meal Planning program in the description below. I'm also making a video about how to maintain fat loss, which will be linked up in the description once it's complete as well. Make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to our channel for weekly actionable nutrition education content just like this.